The move from Tottenham was to Southgate. I hadn't heard of Southgate, never mind visited there. But one day I was taken to see our new home. I didn't see why we had to move from our flat with its lovely garden. But when I saw what was to be our new house, I fell in love with it and couldn't wait. I wanted to move in then and there. The house had been empty for a couple of years and was exactly as the owners had left it. There were eggs in the cupboard, which had turned to powder, and when Dad put them at one end of the dining room table, they walked to the other end on their own. They really did. We were all so taken with it. I remember Dad putting them at the top of the table and then rolling down again. They were honestly, the table had been left for this couple of years, just with all. It was just as if a couple of people had walked out. 2 years had gone by, and we walked in. It's like going to a museum, because I think the people that lived there, they must have been elderly, which meant they came from, First World War sort of time. Anyway, I was just enthralled. There were beautiful tablecloths, doilies and napkins in the built-in dresser, and it was like entering another era. The loft had a wooden pull-down ladder, which was often left down so that Chris and I could play up there and explore the antiques and bric-a-brac. The previous owner was obviously an artist, as his easel, chalks and oils were there. The hall was square, of a good size, and on the left halfway up the stairs was a beautiful stained glass window which let the light flood in. There was a large front room, a back room with French doors, a dining room and kitchen. Upstairs there were 5 bedrooms, all with fireplaces and a bathroom and a separate toilet. It seemed huge after living in a small flat, and the road seemed so quiet. No trolley buses or people passing by walking to the shops. There were maybe only half a dozen cars parked in the road, and it seemed so spacious. Suburbia at its best, I think. The address was 85 Selborne Road, Southgate, London, M14, and it was a long tree-lined road with Edwardian houses on either side. I was to walk up and down that road on many occasions, at all different times of the day and night, and with all sorts of people during the next few years. At the top was a small parade of shops, Ye Old Cherry Tree, a pub, a small village green opposite. On one side of the village green was a school which my children would attend, and on the other side a church where I was to be married. But on the day we visited the house, I didn't, of course, know any of that. I'd lived through a period of quite dramatic changes. The British Empire had begun to break up around the time of my birth, as Britain, weakened by the war, could no longer afford to keep all its distant colonies, and also many of them wanted independence. Teddy boys had appeared, and Elvis was on the scene. The year before, CND marches had been taking place. These were for nuclear disarmament, so things were moving at quite a fast pace. I chose my bedroom on this visit. Everywhere it was all decorated like, end of the First World War. And I chose the back bedroom. Each bedroom had a fireplace in it. And I just loved it. I said, this will be mine. It was at the end of a sort of corridor. And opposite was the bathroom and then the toilet. Well, we moved in March in 1960. As I say, I'd chosen my bedroom on the previous visit, and in the interval of me seeing the house and now moving in, it had been decorated. Sooty, our cat, was put there so that she wouldn't run away. We were told to put butter on her paws to keep her from straying, but whilst the lorry was unloading, Mum and Dad thought she'd be safer shut in. When we went to see if she was all right after the removal men had gone, there was no sign of her. All we could hear were her frantic mews. She tried to climb up the chimney for her escape and was lodged firmly on a ledge. The fire brigade were called, and they suggested putting a bowl of hot fish in the hearth to tempt her or remove the chimney breast. Mum and Dad weren't happy with this suggestion, as the room had only just been done. However, Sooty did eventually come down, bringing a cloud of soot with her, unable to resist the smell of hot, steaming cod. Mum and Dad then began the task of doing the house up. They told me later that what helped them finance the work was a pair of solid gold false teeth Dad found in a bonfire in the garden. The garden was sorted out quite quickly with the help of what I thought was an old tramp called Mr. Locke. He did the digging for Dad, and I remember him telling me names of plants, particularly one I liked called Old Man's Beard. Mr. Locke always had the biggest dewdrop dangling from his nose, and I didn't like to get too near him. He wore a huge dark overcoat in summer and winter. Dad bought some half-glazed doors and cleverly erected them at the end of the garden. They formed a very light playhouse, which we had great fun in. Dad also built me a lovely tree house, which I used to sit in and do my homework. And of course, if the next door neighbours were out in their garden, I'd start a conversation with them and be distracted. I love laying up there and looking around. One day I spied a boy at the end of his garden, which backed onto ours, and often that's where I would be found, chatting to him over the fence. The old features of the house were kept, but the decorations were very modern. I remember the wallpaper in the hall being gunmetal grey, with very small white dots forming stars and galaxies. In the dining room, the paper was black and white, small squares. I think my dad chose hand-printed wallpaper. It was really something. The front room was panelled, a clock inserted in the centre panel over the fireplace, and a window seat built into the bay. Mum and Dad had a gorgeous bar built by a friend who was a craftsman. On the bar were toweling mats, a dark bottle with VAT 69 on it, which when you picked it up played the tune of a wee Doc and Doris, and a see-through bottle which had a Spanish dancer in it. When you picked that one up, it played a different tune, and the dancer twirled round. Also, there was a lamp whose plastic shade had cutouts, which made the light dance on the walls as it twirled round in the darkened room. There were always bottles of Babycham with their shiny silver foil tops in the bar, and as I got older, that was the drink I was allowed to have, in the proper gold-rimmed glasses with the leaping gazelle. I've got one of the glasses here. Remember those? I just remember feeling so grown up when I drank the Babycham and the bubbles going up my nose. This was on the bar. So that's where we are now, moved to Southgate, with me having to travel back to my school and wondering what school I'm going to go to in the September. But it just being such an exciting time. Mum and Dad decorated my room whilst I was away at camp with my friend Elizabeth, who was in my class at school. When I came back, there was a new lilac and white curtains at the window, and around my white wood dressing table, and a new eiderdown. Yeah, I had a white wood dressing table. My daughters had that too when they were growing up. And then, of course, we moved from London here to the seaside, and I just couldn't keep everything. And I let it go. I wish I hadn't now, but I haven't got room for it here. You see, that's where the brain goes, isn't it? You want to keep hold of everything from those days, but I just can't. I couldn't. Anyway, when I came back, there were new lilac and white curtains at the window, and around my white wood dressing table too, and a new eiderdown. It looked very pretty, but when I came home, I flopped on my bed, and after a rest, I came downstairs, and Mum said, "Well?" Can you imagine my mum saying that? "Well?" in an inquiring voice, and I answered, "Well, what?" I hadn't noticed any change. I think I was just glad to be home again. That was because my camp was an experience I shall never forget. Elizabeth's dad was a vicar of a church in Edmonton. Someone had dropped out of the arrangements, and she asked me if I'd like to go camping in Wales for 2 weeks with the church crusaders. I begged Mum to let me go and was champing at the bit. After a long coach journey, I looked around and I was disappointed. It was a large field at Finnanoffy Farm, Dinas Cross, and it was wet and cold, even though it was August. We had a bell tent between 5 of us. We had to select straw for a palliasse, and I can tell you, straw soon flattens, and it's like sleeping on the damp ground. I didn't have a sleeping bag, just blankets and blanket pins. Meals were taken in a marquee, and songs were sung around the campfire. The worst bit was the toilet arrangements, because it was just a field. That's all. Imagine landing up in just a field in a rainy Wales with a palliasse and a blanket pin. Ooh. This consisted of flapping pieces of canvas, a ditch, and a trowel. I'm not joking. You jumped astride the ditch and hoped the canvas didn't flap to expose you. I didn't go to the toilet for 2 weeks. Well, maybe once. Washing was awful. Well, everything was awful. No. I received a lovely letter from Anne, and on the envelope she'd typed, "Hello, you gorgeous thing. Guess who?" Anne's my aunt, and I've still got the envelope. Postman, deliver this to a very pretty miss. We miss you and all that jazz. Southgate is not the same without you. The fairy lights on the tree have gone out. Southgate seemed a million miles away. I did telephone home and begged Dad to collect me, but it was decided I should stick it out. So you see, when I arrived home, everything seemed so wonderful. I just didn't notice the new furnishings in my bedroom. That was quite an experience and something that stayed with me. Growing up, my life up to this point felt carefree, but now there were more responsibilities being added. It's only natural. It's all part of growing up. Of course, I wanted this, but being a child felt safe. Not knowing about the world was a cozy feeling. But as I gradually learned that life didn't just revolve around my school and my family, my inside started to feel a bit scared. Our family called these scared feelings the Hutton collywobbles. We'd often say that. My dad used to suffer from the collywobbles, and my mum, and me. Oh, I feel a bit collywobbly. Oh, sit down, have a drink. What would you like? Shall I squeeze you some oranges? We should put some brown sugar in it. Hot water? Yes, please, Mum. Oh, we always looked after each other if we had the collywobbles. I'm sure other people felt it, especially when on a Sunday night there were thoughts of school next day and Sing Something Simple was played on the wireless. When I met an old school friend years later, she said I was very outgoing, chatty, that was a seagull, very outgoing, chatty and confident, and was definitely the trendy one. I think that's true, but inside there was a part of me that was empty. I think my spiritual side was developing, but not being satisfied, and I think internal conflicts were starting. Well, it's all part of growing up, isn't it? Of course, we understand that now, but at the time it feels very, frightening. I thought I knew who I was, and all of a sudden you start to not quite know who you are. I wanted to carry on doing what others wanted, but I found I had feelings of my own. I joined the school at a point where the girls had been friends since they were small, and so they had a shared background. However well I integrated, I could never enter into their conversations about their past experiences as they came up the school together. My life up until then wasn't really mentioned. That seemed to me to be forgotten, as if a shutter had come down and closed it up. I lost touch with my old friends, except for Elizabeth Miller, and was plummeted into a new life. The girls seemed to know the rules, where everything was, how to do things, and it felt difficult, probably too much all at one go. Looking back, it's natural I felt like this, because to move to a new district, a new school, and to form new friendships would be a challenge for most 11-year-olds. My school friends were left behind, and we hardly ever visited Tottenham again. One day, not long after we'd moved in, Mum called me and said someone was coming to play after lunch. A girl appeared, and we tentatively started to converse. I remember playing out in our lovely front garden. It was a rock garden of sorts, with York stone and small tufts of grass with pink flowers sprouting from the clumps, which is called thrift. It wasn't a big garden, in fact it was very small, but I'd never had a front garden before, and just the fact that I could go out and play in this small piece of garden, I just loved it. I think I've said I always love being outside. Anyway, this girl's name, was Elizabeth Johnston, Dizzy for short, as her little sister Kathy couldn't pronounce Elizabeth when she was young, and Dizzy, or Diz, had stuck. Her dad had died that week, and so she'd come to play with me. She lived at number 80, which was a few doors up on the other side. There weren't many children living in the street, and Diz was the only one I got to know out of the whole time I lived there. I just don't know any other children that lived in the street. Do you play jacks? She asked. No, I said, wondering what they were. She produced from her pocket a small white linen pouch and pulled open the string. Out tumbled 10 metal jacks and a small pink ball covered in white powder with a delicious smell. She showed me how to throw the jacks, and whilst the ball was in the air, pick up a jack and put it in the opposite hand. Onesies, twosies, threesies, foursies, fivesies. That's where I got stuck. How to pick up 6 all at one go, and then the remaining 4 with the ball just bouncing once, seemed a mystery. I kept at it and struggled through until I'd picked up all 10. This took us well into twilight, and we'd obviously struck up a friendship. The next day we walked the long road up to the parade of shops and called into a small toy shop. I bought my own bag of jacks, which held an enormous amount of charm for me. In the days to come, I enjoyed playing hula hoop with Diz and Kath, making a film together. We did. We did it on, is it called Super 8? We did Cinderella. Took us all summer holiday. We planned our lives as astronomers. We were always out looking up at the stars and learning all about it. Doctors, yes, I got a visible woman, or no, invisible woman. Is it? No, visible woman. And it's a kit, and you make it all and put all the insides in. And I thought, oh, after doing this, I could be a nurse or a doctor. But of course, little did I know that I'm very squeamish and I don't even like talking about illness. Archaeologists, yes, we went over the park and we found a huge, beautiful stone. And then in the garden, we were often digging things up, and that was what our archaeological phrase. And we collected beads together. Well, we did that all at school. Did you? Collect beads. We'd swap them. They were beautiful. I wish I'd saved all my collections of things. I collected miniatures, and honestly, I had the most beautiful things. Once you start a collection, it's amazing. But no, I thought when I got married, you can't keep everything, all that. Of course, bitterly regretted it up until today. Anyway, jacks still hold the special place for me because the game conjures up so many memories. Dad had parquet flooring laid in the hall, and this was tailor-made for our games. They'd last for hours. I learned how to balance the jacks on the back of my hand, to collect 10 without letting the ball bounce at all, and to play double bounce. The combinations were unending, and I just hated to be beaten. A funny feeling in my tummy of disappointment. Let's play again, the loser would say, hoping that the next game would be theirs. Okay, the winner would reply, sure that they were unbeatable. Chris would sometimes come and ask to play, but the answer was always a firm no. The game was far too serious to allow a 4-year-old to muck it up. Chris remembered my brother. Kathy was sometimes allowed, but Dizzy usually bossed her about so much she sloped off back home. One day a grand piano was delivered. It was an old pub piano and bought for Mum as she played by ear. I showed an interest and started taking lessons. These were with Miss Tinner. I wish they'd been with a younger piano teacher, but Miss Tinner it was, and I was so scared of her. She was a small old lady with glasses so thick you couldn't see her eyes. If she wanted to look at a note on the printed page, she would hold the music about an inch from her face and her head would wobble up and down. If I hesitated, she would say, come along, you haven't practiced, have you? Mum decided to have some lessons at one point, but I don't think she lasted very long, as she felt too scared. She told me in our chats that we did for the early chinwags, that Miss Tinner actually slapped her hands. When you think she was a mother of two, it defies belief, really, but that's how teachers were in those days, wasn't it? Well, some of them. As I progressed, Mum and Dad bought me a good second-hand upright piano, which I spent hours playing. Hours and hours. One day a man came to tune the piano. Would you like to be my little helper? I felt privileged and proud as we went into the front room, and he asked me to move the notes up and down for him, as he tweaked the strings in the back of the piano. As I did this, I felt extremely embarrassed, as he was so close to me, and I could feel parts of his person I didn't wish to feel. After a few times I began to question whether this was right, and asked myself how he managed to tune other people's pianos on his own. I talked this over with Diz, and she volunteered to be his little helper the next time he came. I shall never forget her exploding out of the room and saying, "Tell your mum." I didn't feel I could. How embarrassing. Nevertheless, I plucked up courage and said to Mum I didn't like him and why. A new piano tuner was found, and I was relieved. I put here he was blind as well, a double bonus. That's not very kind, but I think that's how I felt. It frightened me, and I didn't know if it was me that was thinking wrong or if it was, I didn't know right from wrong. But yeah, Dizzy was my friend then, and she helped me. A cute cocker spaniel arrived one day. We called him Rover and loved him. He wasn't with us for long, though, as he bit my brother. I went into Mum's bedroom one night and she was crying. "I know he had to go," she said, "but I'll miss him." Not long after, we had Toby, a golden Labrador. He was the naughtiest dog in the whole wide world. He wrecked our house, pulling down curtain rails, eating and chewing everything he could lay his hands on, and he was the biggest baby there could be. If Mum went out, Gladys, our next-door neighbour, would come in and dog-sit. Gladys was a spinster who lived with her elderly mum, whom we called Mrs. Thomas. They had a lovely grandfather clock, which they wound by pulling on the metal chains. They did this at the same time every week on Sunday evening. It was reassuring hearing them through the front room wall. They were a nice couple of old ladies, but did moan when Sooty caught birds in their garden. After they died, a solicitor told Mum that they'd left her the grandfather clock, which I now have, and £1,000. Mum bought a beautiful grand piano to remember them by, but that was a few years later. Talking of moaning, I used to moan all the time about Toby. If he wasn't wrecking the place, he was brushing up against me and leaving what seemed like his whole coat as short white hairs. He molted all year round, and consequently I never wore black or dark colours because it was impossible to stay dog hair free. Anyway, after the summer holidays of playing jacks, exploring the local parks, making friends with Diz, and generally settling down in Southgate, I started my new school. I'd sat for the entrance exam when we knew we were going to move, and I think there were about 10 of us vying for 4 places. I didn't find the exam difficult or hard. I just did it and thought I'd get in. However, my marks weren't good enough to be accepted until someone backed out. So I suppose I was 5th, wasn't I? And when a letter unexpectedly was received saying I could start in September, I was excited. It felt a bit daunting, but Diz and Kate had been at the school from tiny, and they promised to show me the ropes. As it happened, Auntie Phyllis, Diz's mum, couldn't afford the fees now that her husband Bob had died, and so Diz was only with me for 1 term. However, I'd made friends of my own by then and was all right. The school was about 20 minutes' walk away, with Bourne Hill to negotiate. I sailed down on my bike and walked home, pushing it up the long hill. Farmers Green High School wasn't a big school. It took children from 2.5 up to 16, with 1 class for each year. The little ones were taught in a house next door. The famous actress Margaret Rutherford had attended the school, and Stevie Smith, the poet, lived a few doors down the road. There were 3 Pennies in my class, which surprised me as I'd never met anyone with my name before. The uniform was very strict, and I felt stifled by the rules. The school had just changed from a navy gym slip to a grey pleated skirt, green viola blouse, grey jumper, grey socks, and indoor and outdoor regulation shoes. We also had a beret for the rain and a velour hat for dry winter weather. If we didn't have the right hat on in the appropriate weather, then woe, thrice woe. Order marks were dished out, and these went on your report. I had gym shoes with gym kit, hockey kit, tennis kit, swimming gear. I was overwhelmed. Our blazer was bottle green, and the scarf was green, navy blue, and cerise pink in broad stripes. In the summer, I wore an apple green dress with white collar and cuffs, and a straw Panama hat. I wished I'd had longer legs, so that the lace-up shoes looked better with the dress or skirt, but I was short, and everything seemed to swamp me. I'd forgotten my navy blue raincoat. Mum and Dad had taken me to D.H. Evans in Oxford Street to kit me out, and decided that they would buy me a raincoat that would last, and it did, until I left school. What a picture this all paints. Can you see the 11-year-old girl, dressed to the nines, and feeling conspicuous in the pristine outfits? I definitely felt better when the damp velour hat had been squashed into my satchel a few times. It helped me feel like an old hand rather than a new girl. I grew to love the Panama when it was hanging down my back, swinging from its elastic, and a few small holes appeared in the straw. But everything was new. It was time to start growing up a bit.